Welcome back to the next episode of William and Sly's Thrill and Adventure. We're going to continue reading The Secret Places and Hidden Things, which is the prequel to William and Sly. And as I'm reading, I may have to take breaks to talk to the few NPCs when they decide that they want some attention. Alright, let's get started. We're picking back up in Chapter 4. Jack spent the rest of the morning with Derek in the dining room, where it had been snowy and cold when he woke up. Now it was raining quietly, clouds and mists obscuring any new landscape that might have appeared out the windows. They were sitting in the dim light, listening to the fire crackle, and working their way through a full spread of pastries. Jack had never seen so many different kinds of bread. "Where did you get all this?" Jack asked. "Oh, well, funny you should ask," Derek started to say, but a burst of light suddenly broke through the clouds, revealing a forested valley curving past the window and a steep cliff beyond. The fog had cleared in an instant. Derek leaned back in his chair and clapped politely, watching the river sparkle over a waterfall below. Somehow, springtime had come without warning. It was a moment before Jack realized a woman was sitting in the chair next to Derek. Jack couldn't say how it happened, but after the light had shifted, she was there as surely as she hadn't been before. She had impossibly red hair, coppery green eyes, and she was wearing a bright yellow dress with red and gold embroidery around the edges. Flowers and fire made from real gemstones. She seemed frozen in place. Jack looked at Derek, but he made no apparent response, watching the scene as if it was a mildly interesting show. The golden light streaming in through the windows set the woman's hair aflame with color, bright dust motes dancing above her. Suddenly, she moved, blinking rapidly and jerking back as if she'd just woken up. "What's all this?" she asked, looking around quickly. She fixed her gaze on Derek. He couldn't have been more opposite with his pale eyes and white hair. Even his skin appeared gray next to her. He was almost not there, like a drawing rather than a person. "This is the dining room," Derek said, smiling blandly. Jack passed her a glass of water, and she looked at it with wonder. After taking a sip, she narrowed her eyes and looked at him suspiciously. "I know this, but you've stolen the word for it." "It's just water," Jack said, with his eyebrows raised. She gave him a sly look. "Are you new?" he asked. "New?" She was feeling her face with her hands. "Have you ever been to the Helm before?" "No, she hasn't," Derek said. "At least not like this." "Do you remember your name?" Jack asked. She looked at him a moment. "Meryl. I'm Meryl." She sat up straight after saying this, like the name gave her some self-control. "Are you hungry?" Derek asked. He slid a bowl of some thick brown soup towards her. She looked at it without comment, and Jack wondered what it was. He'd never seen anything like it. "Why am I here?" she asked. "I don't remember anything." "Well, I don't know," Derek said, waving one of his hands airily. Jack couldn't help but laugh. "Derek isn't very helpful." She looked at Derek with appraising eyes. He just looked back at her vaguely, blinking occasionally. "No, I guess not." "You remember anything else? Anything at all?" Jack asked. She looked at him for a moment, then looked around the room. "What is this place?" she asked. "This is the Helm. That's what Derek calls it anyway. It's a big castle, I think. The doors are always changing." Suddenly, Derek leaned forward, looking into Meryl's ear. She leaned away, one of her eyebrows twitching. "You have something in there," Derek said. Before she could react, he reached up with one of his spidery hands and plunged his whole arm into the side of her head. Her ear stretched to accommodate his thin wrist, and she flinched sideways, her face the picture of shock. With another movement, Derek pulled his hand free and revealed a tiny fox dangling by the scruff of its neck. "Well, look at that," Derek said, dropping the fox on the table. Meryl's eyes were still wide. She looked at the fox in front of her and then felt her ear gingerly. It was back to its normal size and shape. "I bet your thoughts are all fuzzy," Derek said, scratching the fox under the chin. It closed its eyes and leaned forward, stretching its jaws to follow his hand. Meryl braced her arms on the table, stood up without saying another word, and walked out the door, the jewels on her dress flashing. Should we go with her? Jack asked. I don't know, Derek said, shrugging. Chapter 5. As the next few days went by, Jack might have been happy for another companion at the helm if it had been anyone other than Meryl. She was never overtly hostile or unpleasant, but whenever she looked at him, a cold, heavy feeling would creep into his stomach. He hadn't noticed that first day, but her pupils were long and wide like a goat's, and the iris were hard and metallic, flashing green or gold as she shifted her glance. He could never quite tell where she was looking, and more than once he saw her turn away after catching his eye. She seemed to spend most of her time in the library, researching what he couldn't guess, so he set about exploring the helm. At first he was afraid of getting lost, but the helm always seemed to bring him where he wanted to be. When he was hungry, he found food. When he was tired, a bed. And even so, as the days went by, he found he wanted less and less. Eating became a pastime, and sleeping just marked the rotations of some inner clock. Time itself had lost all meaning. Days lasted forever or faded into each other without notice, and when it was night, he usually just wanted to explore. There was no shortage of wonders to keep him busy, too. Though he soon came to realize the helm operated on a more subtle level than he originally expected. He had tried to roll up the dining room table like Derek had many times, but all it ever did was sit there. When he thought about it, he figured that, even though he was disappointed every time, he still expected the table to roll up on his next try, and this was why it didn't. He made sure to never attempt this in front of Derek, but he suspected he knew about it because, after one of their meals together, he folded the table neatly into an origami crane and walked out the door. The thing that bothered Jack the most was that he never came across the trinket room again. He knew it was bound to appear eventually, but he was itching to find out what was in that locked box. Like the table, he figured this was why it remained elusive and tried to remove it from his mind. One evening, while Jack was wandering the hallways, he was surprised to hear a few faint echoes of a song drifting towards him from some far-off place. It was a woman's voice, but it didn't sound like Meryl, or perhaps he couldn't imagine Meryl singing. He tried to follow it to its source, but never seemed to get closer to it, even after hours of searching. He asked Derek about it later, while they were roasting marshmallows in a small room full of antique lanterns. Oh, that must be the wind getting ready for winter, he said. How do you go about marking down seasons in a place like this? Jack asked. Derek adjusted a log with the poker, sending sparks up the chimney. It's been fall for a while. Haven't you noticed the changing leaves? He motioned to the window where a grove of pine trees was visible in the twilight. Winter comes after fall, you know. He tapped his nose knowingly. It was winter just a few days ago, and fall came right after it, Jack said. Not to mention pine trees don't change color. In fact, now that I think about it, there's only been one day of summer the whole time I've been here. I remember it distinctly because the glass disappeared off the windows. How do you know there's only been one day of summer? What if you just pass over time faster than the rest of us civilized people? Derek asked with a wary smile. As if to punctuate this idea, the fox padded into the room, fully grown, and laid itself in front of the fire. Derek raised his eyebrows, and Jack couldn't tell if he was surprised or if he was saying, "Point proven." Oh, you know that fox will be tiny again tomorrow. Stop avoiding the question. The fox yawned and pawed at their legs. The only thing I'm sure of is that I can't be sure about anything, he said. Jack could only shrug. He supposed he was right. After Derek wandered off with the fox sniffing at his heels, Jack sat by the window watching stray flower petals drift down from a flowering tree somewhere above. His mind was unfocused, and it was a time before he realized the world had tilted around him. Out the window, there was a ground far to the left, an endless sky to the right, a strange flat horizon bisecting the two down the middle. It made much more sense when he had looked above him and saw a spiral staircase had appeared in the ceiling. He was sitting against the wall of a tall tower. His curiosity piqued, he decided to see where it led. It took a long time to get to the end, or rather, the top, of the tower, and when he found himself standing in front of a round door, which must have actually been a trap door in the ceiling, he tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge either way. After a bit of a struggle, he wasn't going to walk all the way up a tower just to hit a dead end. He sat down and stared at it, willing to open. To his surprise, it did. Most people knock when they want to be let in somewhere, a woman said, her face appearing at the edge of the door. Her gray hair was floating through it strangely, sticking out in front of her head. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was here." Jack noticed he was looking at the ceiling through the door. This woman must be leaning out over a hole in the floor. "Well, come on in. I don't like to leave guests standing outside on the walls." The face disappeared. Jack stepped through the threshold, and even though there wasn't a floor, he somehow made it into the room in the correct orientation. The lady was standing in front of him. He looked behind him and he saw a balcony overlooking the valley outside. He shook his head. "You know, the strangest part about this place is how I never seem to notice the edges between things." The woman gave him a knowing smile. "That's a lot truer than you think. I'm Wynne, by the way. Who are you?" She closed the trap door with a bang. "Oh, I'm Jack." "Nice to meet you, Jack. Want some tea?" She motioned towards the balcony. There was a small round table with a steaming pot of tea and a plate of cookies. He sat down on the bench surrounding the wall and poured himself a cup. The balcony was nestled into the side of the tower and covered by a half-dome, like the wall had been scooped away. And it was also the first place in the helm Jack had seen that wasn't made of black stone. Here, everything was white marble, full of intricate floral carvings and covered with soft, white pillows and sheets. "So, you live up here? I bet that was your singing I kept hearing." Wynne sat down next to him, brushing some stray petals off the table in front of her. There was a blooming tree on the corner of the balcony, dropping its petals on a light wind. "Yeah, I never really leave the tower. I have almost everything I need up here. Sometimes I have to go visit my storage room to pick something up, but it's such a bother. Those stairs are grueling." She wrinkled her nose. "That was pretty smart of you to use the wall. I wonder why I never thought of that before." Jack laughed. "Don't give me too much credit. I didn't do it on purpose." "A purpose isn't necessary. The fact that you did it means it's possible, and all you need is possibility and a desire to make something happen." Jack thought about this for a moment. "That doesn't seem to be true for me. Derek folded up a table, and I can't do it no matter how hard I try." "Why do you keep trying, then?" she asked, giving him a quizzical look. "That obviously doesn't work." "Oh, that's something he would say. You must be related to him." She did seem to be, too. She was very pale, with the same icy blue eyes and colorless hair Derek had. She definitely seemed much older than him, though. Maybe that meant Derek was young? Well, not really. I haven't seen him for a very long time, actually. She scratched the side of her mouth and gave him a hard look. "You're much more related to him than I am, though. That's for sure." Wait, do you know who I am?" Jack asked. "Not in the way you're asking. I know most people when I meet them, but I don't know who they are, just what they are." He sipped at her tea. He took a sip too and was momentarily lost in the sensation. It felt like spring and fall curling over him in alternating waves. All of his muscles melted into the cushions behind him. "Oh, sorry, it might be a bit strong." He shook his head to clear it. Lights jumped behind his vision. "You mind if I knit while we talk? I'm in the middle of a project." "These trees are massive. Have you climbed to the top? I bet you could see a long way off." Wynne took out a bucket of water and a silver serving tray full of strange little oddments, setting them in front of her by the teapot. "What's the water for?" Jack asked. "The thread. It's fresh rainwater from yesterday." She began pulling a long thread out of the water, or rather, a long thread of water out of the bucket, and spooling it around a wooden peg. It sparkled in the sunlight. Jack furrowed his brow. He distinctly remembered yesterday being sunny. He had tried to find some way he could go outside to enjoy it, but had to compromise with a solarium and an open window when that plan failed. I didn't notice rain yesterday, but then time moves at different speeds here, doesn't it? Wynne nodded. I bet Derek told you. He has a mind for concrete explanations. All I know is that it rained for me, so I put out my bucket. I never presumed to tell you what your reality was. He thought a moment. Though, if you see water here and not sunshine, obviously that's not where our opinions are diverging. Time certainly seems to be the culprit, doesn't it? She scratched her chin, looking at the pail of water critically. Suddenly, her hand slipped, and a few loops fell off the spool, splashing onto the bench between them. Ugh. You know, I think I'm supposed to be right-handed, but the damn thing never works properly for me. It just feels loose somehow. She switched the spool to her left hand and plucked the thread out of the droplets on the bench, working it back onto the peg. Do you know Derek well? He asked. Well enough to read him, at least a long time ago when I last saw him. Is he still here? He's here in my reality, he said, the corner of his mouth twitching. She nodded, watching her fingers carefully as they worked. How do you feel about the helm? He thought about it for a moment. I'm not sure yet. A lot of people feel really lost when they get here. Like that Meryl character. I think she's looking for someone. Or maybe something? You've met her? No, but I've seen her around. And she left it at that. He sat for a moment, transfixed by the flashing of the silvery thread curling out of the bucket. How do I go about finding the edges of things? That's how you're making that thread, isn't it? She gave him a sidelong glance. I'm not looking for edges. I'm just spooling some water. She gave her spool a deft little twist and let go. The peg hung in the air, winding itself. You know, Jack, I think you're trying much too hard. You found your way into my tower without trying. Be able to dress yourself and walk around without trying. Logically, you should just keep doing that since it seems to work rather well, no? He shrugs. I don't understand. I can't seem to stop myself from trying. See, you're still trying. Trying not to try. Still trying. She paused to snip the thread with the silver scissors, winding the excess onto the spool, and picked up a pair of 3-pronged needles and began knitting. He couldn't see how she was making sense of the chaos between the prongs, but it was certainly making something. This is a place for wandering and wondering. If you don't know what your intentions are, any result is a success. She snipped the thread again and placed her finished product on the tray. Jack bent down to look. It was a snowflake. He sat and thought about this for a time. He wondered if she wasn't actually trying to make anything in particular. It was hard to believe she was acting without intention, but maybe she just meant that she didn't have to make any effort. He certainly had done a lot of interesting things by accident, but if that was the only way to accomplish anything, he would have to reconfigure his mind to make them happen when he wanted. She was on her 10th snowflake when he spoke again. I don't understand completely, but I think that's the point. Precisely. And he felt something snap into place. Chapter 6. Jack! Meryl suddenly appeared in the doorway, making him jump. He was in the small circular room off the entrance hall, roasting chestnuts as snow fell by the window. Somehow it had become winter again, and Derek had been right to say it was a cozy room on a cold day. He was warm in spite of the frost glazing the window. What is it? It's the most amazing thing, but... She looked around. I can't show you here. It's too crowded. Just follow me. He was wrapped in a blanket and didn't like the idea of wandering through icy corridors, but she grabbed his hand and pulled him roughly to his feet. A tray of chestnuts went flying. He managed to keep himself from falling on his face, but lost all the warmth from the blanket in the process. He wrapped it back around himself with one hand as Meryl marched him out the door. They walked for several minutes, and Jack could see the initial anticipation fading from her face. She kept opening doors at random, shaking her head and moving on. Once or twice, she stopped in the middle of the corridor, looked around, and went the opposite way, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Finally, she snapped. Oh, what's the use? She slammed the door she'd been about to walk through and shook her clenched fist. This place is just an endless maze. We can walk forever and never find the library. That silly aquarium seems easy enough to find, though. She pointed violently at the door. If I hadn't seen sharks attacking dolphins at least 5 times a day, I'll really start to worry. His eyebrows rose, and his jaw had fallen a little, and he closed his mouth quickly. He tried to find something to say. Sharks attacking dolphins? In the aquarium? Yes, she said, looking thoughtfully at the door. You know, I actually like the aquarium. I don't know why I got so mad at it. But how could sharks and dolphins fit? Whenever I've been in there, the walls are made of glass and the water seems to go on forever, she said. There are always big fish, too. Well, I don't think dolphins are fish, but you know what I mean. She opened the door again. There were no dolphins, no aquarium even, just lots of books. They had finally found the library. Oh, that's rich. She walked through the door, glaring at the frame as if it had personally insulted her, and made her way into the large open foyer at the back of the library. When he followed, she motioned for him to sit down. I was walking along the shelves looking at the books, and I found one about dance. I didn't know what it was, but somehow the word was familiar to me. I felt something in my limbs. She seemed to wrestle with the words. It was like a potential was there, like I was meant to do something with them. Well, I read the first chapter and I realized I must be a dancer. She followed this proclamation with a flourish of her wrist. I need you to watch me and tell me if it's real or if I just look like I'm making things up. He nodded soberly. The idea of telling her she was making things up sounded like a bad idea, so I decided he would say she looked great no matter how it turned out. She walked gracefully to the side of the foyer. She stopped at the edge of the rug right before the fireplace and turned to face the shelves. Her dress furled hypnotically around her in golden waves, and something in the room changed. He felt a tingle run down his spine. As she closed her eyes, the space around her became muted and transparent. She had released a part of her hold on the world, drifting away to a place where she could exist without effort. She took a step forward, and her face, suddenly impassive, gliding through some seer in a trance. An occult breeze floated up around to play with her hair and the folds of her dress. She was weightless, anchored to the earth, to reality, by only the faintest connection between foot and floor. The lights of the room dimmed, or perhaps she shone brighter. For a moment, the scene stood still, balanced on the razor edge of the abyss. Then, with a step, her feet left the floor entirely. Revolutions and bends in one movement, her form arrayed slowly in layers like a blooming flower. The air thickened and held her in its embrace, distorting the colors behind her and the light congealing in flashes. Twilight rose with shooting stars, even as she shone more brightly, like burning silver flecked with red and gold. Then night, a wraith-like light, darkling clouds obscuring the brilliance of the moon. Her eyes opened, glowing and sparking with some strange and radiant impulse, a glimmering need and craving, a fiery half-remembered greed. A wind pulled at her, tore at her, crying with the voice on the mountain, the heated depths of the ocean, so massive it could not be heard, but felt. She wreathed flame-like, snake-like, guided by the breathing air. Movements came from within, a living force beyond her control, displacing and contorting her body in an ecstatic frenzy. She was a memory, envied by things to come, pure wanting laid bare in its lust for perfection. Her mind was naked in its passion, and all of her past was exposed, a wasteland of bitterness and raw desire. Then it slowed, the rhythms cooled, red became green, became blue. Her feet were grounded, light mingled with darkness. Grayness replaced color like a blindness. He felt for a moment that he couldn't see, but realized his mind, like his eyes, simply needed time to adjust. Somehow he had witnessed something eyes were not made to perceive, and it changed how they functioned. She stood before him, an expectant look on her face, and he wondered if his memory was some embellishment of the truth, or if the truth had been as strange as his memory made him believe. It had only felt like moments, but the sun was lower in the sky, about to rest its feet on the edge of the horizon. That was... He couldn't speak. He didn't want to speak. He broke into a knowing smile. It was amazing! Amazing to remember something to hold on to, something to know is real. She did a pirouette, and Jack thought he saw a ripple of gold roll off her trailing sleeve and dissolve into an evening sunbeam. This place is so full of doubts, but when I'm dancing, it's like floating away from all of my problems. He nodded. Somehow, he understood. Deep memories threatened to make their way into his mind. He wondered if she knew what she had really done, but he didn't want to frighten her by asking. Later, when he was making his way back to his room after dinner, he found himself in the library once more. She was still there, sitting at the window, watching a bright star low on the horizon. He didn't notice her at first, and then she shifted, and the gems on her dress glimmered. "Oh, hello, Meryl," Jack said. "Hello," she said, not turning away from the star. "The stag, make a wish." "Little fox, can you hear? I'm in a strange tower, all dark, very high. Woman, magic Ouroboros, can find me. I get out of here." "You may have completely destroyed my plans, but I have your silly friend locked away in my tower now. With him out of the way, I expect you have little ability on your own. I'm not sure if it's even worth starting over, but at least I can rest knowing your day is ruined too." "Is it? Well, that's a shame. I'm watching Venus rise." Her voice was soft and low. "I've forgotten everything. I don't know who I am." He walked over to her and sat down. "I understand," he said. "I felt so empty when I first got here. I don't anymore, though. It takes some time." She looked over at him. "I don't feel empty, though. I'm so full of things. I can feel them all out there, right at the edge of my memory, trying to remind me what I am." He looked out the window. There was no moon, but the star on the horizon was so bright, it cast a faint glow on the trees. A lake in the distance shimmered. "Maybe you don't need to know them to use them. What about your dancing?" She sighed. "I don't want to use them. I don't know what I want." She moved with her hands, her face tense in the starlight. "I know that I want something, but whatever it is, whatever I'm here for, it won't come to me." He thought about this for a moment. "I don't think there is a purpose, to be honest. If you do anything at all here, it will probably come to nothing. This is what's bothering me. I feel like there's so much that I am, so much I can do, but none of it will be worthwhile. No one will care, and it will all be forgotten. What's a dancer without an audience?" She shook her head. "Is that so bad, though? It seems like a great freedom to me. We can do nothing at all, or anything at all. Whatever we make, it's for ourselves." "But that just means it's all worthless. All of the beauty and potential of this place comes to nothing." She shook her head again and looked at him. "I don't want to be nothing." "Just because there's nothing giving you permission to do something, that doesn't mean you can't do it. If you weren't here to look at the star, would it be worthless? Would it be any less beautiful?" She looked out over the horizon. The wind shifted, scattering waves on the lake like rippling fabric. She seemed like she was going to answer, but the silence just grew. "I don't know," she said finally. "It just exists, that's all." Suddenly she sat up. "Oh, I see. It just exists." She laughed magnificently. "It just exists and it doesn't matter. I can do whatever I want." Something transformed in her face. "Thank you, Jack. I think I understand now." She stood abruptly, her figure imposing and statuesque in the starlight. The green in her eyes hardened to metal, her unsettling pupils extended sideways as a smile crept across her face. She walked away full of some newfound confidence, and Jack could only wonder what she was thinking. Chapter 7. For 3 days the helm wandered along cold ocean cliffs. He whiled away the hours in the solarium watching giant seabirds fly over the rolling waves and dive for fish. With the windows open and the salty breeze relaxed him, and he spent his time counting the shades of blue and green in the water far below. Then the storms rolled in, giving him a restless energy. He wandered the halls as the rain lashed against the windows and the thunder rolled into the high parts of the vaulted ceilings. There were countless protected alcoves where he could step out onto a balcony and watch the lightning fork through the clouds. The mist from the rain was cool on his face as it sliced the air just beyond the eaves. It was dark, but the lighting was almost constant, and the boiling clouds overhead assumed all number of interesting shapes. After hours of walking and exploring, he stumbled right into Wynn's tower when he opened a door that was supposed to lead outside. As he fell sideways through her floor, the world tilted to accommodate him. "Oh, Jack, I thought you might be coming," Wynn said. "I unlatched the door for you." She was sitting in front of a rustic wooden harp, her hands resting on the strings. "Did you walk up the wall again? It's always interesting watching you come in." He looked behind him. There was a large half-finished tapestry on the loom. The door had disappeared. He looked down through the hole at his feet and saw a very normal flight of circular steps. "No, actually, I just walked through a door this time." "Interesting." She plucked a few notes. "I'd just been playing some music. The storm put me in a mood." She started a ballad full of slow, expectant chords, then moved up the scale, then resolved into a rainy melody of soft high notes every few bars. He felt something warm and still bloom in his chest. There was a low fire burning in the grate. It was the only illumination aside from the dull twilight coming through the windows. Wynn's room seemed to be the only one in the tower, as it was perfectly round, but only one side had windows. The pair of French doors leading onto her balcony were shut, but the windows besides them were open, letting in the smell of the rain and the sea. The eaves went out far enough to keep the water from splashing in. A quiet, windy sound, mixed with the far-away rolling roar of the ocean and the occasional peal of distant thunder, accompanied her song. He walked over to the fire and sat down on the couch in front of it. A small movement beside him made him jump, but it turned out to be the fox. It yawned wildly and set its head on his leg. "That fox was scratching at my door earlier," she told him. "I didn't hear it at first because of the rain, but it was pretty persistent. I don't think it likes the thunder." As on cue, a bit of thunder rolled out, and the fox wrinkled its nose. He laughed and scratched it behind the ears. "You know," he said after a while, "I realized today that I haven't done much of anything since I got here, except read a few books. The odd part is, it doesn't seem to matter." She stopped playing and scratched her nose, looking at him. "I know what you mean," she told him. "There are lots of things people do here, though. It seems like most people find some calling. The helm is so full of potential, after all." She started her song again. "What sorts of things do people do?" "Well, I like to play music, obviously." She flourished her fingers into a complicated set of chords. "But mostly, I like to weave and sew and knit and twine. All to do with thread is fine." She winked. "What does Derek do?" he asked. "Derek?" She stopped again. "He is special. He's empty, you know. Maybe he's an example of doing nothing at all with great skill." She started a new song, something a little faster as the rain picked up intensity. "I wonder what sort of thing I'd be good at," he said. "Meryl showed me her dancing the other day. She said it just came to her without any effort." "Probably knew how to dance before she came here," she told him, nodding. "You think I should try dancing?" he asked. She laughed. "Nah, you don't seem like the type." She looked at him carefully, squinting her eyes. Her hands drifted off the harp as she concentrated, but the song kept going. "You have an artsy look about you," she said finally. "You're all..." She motioned up and down with her hands. "I don't know, artsy." Her hands went back onto the harp, continuing the song with her fingers. "How do you know?" he asked. "I just know people. Like I know who you are. Maybe we've met before." She leaned back a bit, and the harp tilted on her shoulder. Test it out if you don't believe me. I have some paper and a pen by the couch there. He looked around and spotted a small pad of paper sitting on the table next to the arm. He leaned over to grab it, and the fox rolled over with a whine of protest. At first, he just sat there, staring at the empty page, but the harp and the rain seemed to get into his mind. He began to make long curling marks on the paper. This woke up some distant part of his memory, and the lines began resolving themselves into an image, moving wave-like and changing color, shaping themselves organically. The pen seemed to come alive, dancing with his hand and reading his intentions, glowing soft and warm with excitement. The fox sat up and looked over his shoulder, making a quiet, bubbling sound in the back of its throat. Jack felt like he could taste the shapes as they passed through him, wandering dreamily on a landscape of color, where each piece of the world had its own rightful place to settle in. All he needed to do was direct each contour where he wished, and there it would appear on his page. Eventually, he put down his pen, his face the picture of trance-like relaxation. She came over to look. See, I was right, she told him. You even noticed the fox isn't actually a fox. He looked down at the paper. It seemed to be a portrait. Somehow it looked like both a fox and a human. If it's not a fox, then what is it? He couldn't help but feel the drawing was familiar somehow. I don't know, but there have been a number of strange creatures at the helm before, she told him. Usually it means Michael is going to come back. The fox is actually pretty normal in comparison. When she said the name Michael, the fox looked up at her expectantly. Win, little fox. But it'll be soon enough. Who's Michael? He asked. Oh, he pops in and out. He's been here as long as I can remember, but he disappears quite a lot. He's like Derek that way. I don't think they ever really leave, but they move far away from where I am. The helm is a big place, after all. Suddenly, he remembered. Oh, I know where this is from, he said. I saw a hallway full of small statues just like this the night I first came here. You did? I don't think I've ever seen that. This creature of yours is certainly familiar, though. She went back over to her harp. The hours whirled by as Jack sat and talked with Wynne about her weaving. Occasionally he'd pull out a new piece of paper and draw something. It seemed so effortless. He would start by making marks on the paper, and from the abstract web of lines, a tree, or another strange creature, or a face that seemed so familiar would appear in suggestion, like a false image, and he would know a moment of revelation as he began to focus the lines. He felt like he was drawing his past, but the memories were just out of reach. These small fragments were all he could grasp off the edge of a high shelf. When the storm finally died, and Jack was heading off to bed, she gave him a red hardbook cover with a spring-loaded clamp for the paper. She tucked a shiny golden pen into the loop on the outside. Here you go. Now you'll have something to fill your time. Chapter 8. A long time ago. Two companions found themselves on a wide, flat plain. William could feel gravity pulling him down. It was strongest on the soles of his feet, where the textures of the stone molded with the skin. The very air had weight. The sky was open above them, with great stormy clouds and a distant half-obscured sun swimmingly hazily on this horizon. It smelled red, and it looked red. Blood spattered the fields, and groaning men were lying everywhere. What is this place? Jack asked. It looks like a battlefield, William told him. Jack had a detached look on his face. William could understand completely. He wondered why they had appeared here, of all places. A loud crack of thunder made them jump. The low-hanging clouds pulled apart with a burst of lightning. Shining objects were falling to the ground, and in the distance cannons went off in a flurry louder than the thunder, and a black arc of iron went hurling over their heads. Suddenly, right in front of them, a giant golden bell hit the earth with a cloud of dust. From behind them, a screaming swarm of men came running, some carrying the giant bells above their heads, letting them ring wildly. Man ran right between them and grabbed the bell that had fallen in front of them without breaking a stride. "This must mean something," William said. "Why would they need bells?" The battlefield began to stretch away, distorting and blurring into an array of lines. It was like the cannons had never been there. The great bells were still falling around them, but they had slowed, landing softly like feathers. William felt a great distance before him, and the further he looked into it, the darker it seemed to get. The clouds above faded into green and then black. The ground became smooth and featureless. At the farthest distance the sun hung like a burning coil, impossible to look at, but almost dark. The soldiers had stopped running. They seemed to float by, their colors running together. Their bells burned with shimmering gold. The sound was transparent, like glass shattering in a vacuum. It began to rain, huge droplets bubbling slowly out of the swirling sky. The air had thickened, each drop flowing around it in sections. Wherever the rain landed, the blood disappeared, and a spray of roses bloomed outward. Jack caught some water in his hand, and it solidified heavily, like a star given form, rainbows dancing beneath the smooth white surface. In it, he could see the reflection of the bells glittering. It seemed to absorb the sound and emit something even purer, a single high, operatic note that cleared every thought from his mind. He could see a figure like a giant porcelain spider, splitting itself apart in sheets. His body went limp, and he dropped the orb, which shattered like a flash of light in a burst of wind. The clouds and the soldiers were blown away like ash. The bells seemed to sprout and grow into long, endlessly swaying grass. Rolling hills moved in from the distant sunrise. "I think something just happened," Jack said. "Do you remember it?" William asked. He thought for a while. "I remember bells ringing in a storm." "Yes, I think that's right," William said. "It was loud, wasn't it?" Jack nodded. "You know, I think we need to try to remember more, Jack. I don't remember how we got here." Jack smiled wearily. "I know you've said that before, so I must remember something." William laughed. "I suppose it doesn't really matter." The wind felt very clean. It smelt fresh, like it had just rained, and the air was pleasantly cool and warm at the same time. As they walked, leaves crunched under their feet, hidden among the swaying grasses. From somewhere, not high above, an engine was sputtering. They looked up and saw a massive, ancient-looking plane, more rust than metal, making its way slowly across the sky. It left a thick plume of oily smoke behind it. Suddenly, a flicker of flames appeared, and the plane went into a dive. It streaked right over their heads and crashed into the hillside in front of them, spraying dirt and fire in all directions. They could feel the flames from where they stood. Jack went running towards the wreck, stumbling on a fallen piece of engine, and rolled his way down the rest of the hill. From above, someone was laughing. "You sure look silly, little guy," a man said, parachuting down and landing succinctly next to Jack at the bottom of the hill. He was grotesquely fat, with a big walrus mustache and a leather flying hat on his head. His goggles looked like black saucers. He looked up at the smoldering wreckage wedged into the hillside above him. "Well, we always did say we'd drive it into the ground, so there you go." "Who are you?" William asked, walking up behind Jack. "Who are we? Well, that's not important at all. Stop asking silly questions." William stumbled mid-stride, thinking rapidly. Jack decided to give it a try. "Okay, what are you?" "That's a little better. Much more interesting. Still not very important, though." Jack smiled. "Let's see, how about... Why are you here?" The man thought for a moment, seemingly going through a mental checklist of what could constitute a proper question. "We're here because we just crashed our plane, of course." William rolled his eyes. "Well, you two have fun." And he walked away up the hill. Jack scrunched up his face and thought. The man sat down on a rock, and Jack sat down next to him. "Who's your best friend?" Jack asked. "Oh-ho! Now we're getting somewhere. We are the most famous operatic note in all lengths of time." Jack didn't know opera. From somewhere, a long, piercing note prickled at his memory. "How many legs do you have?" Well, I say. Further up the hill, William was picking his way through the smoldering wreckage. There wasn't much left of the plane. All the metal looked like lacework from the rusted bits that had been blown away in the explosion. It smelled sickly sweet, like gas. Where are we right now? Jack asked. Oh, come now, the man sputtered, his walrus mustache twitching. You're going backwards with that one. Fine, I'll just ask the obvious question, Jack said, crossing his arms defiantly. What are the bells for? The man looked a little disappointed. You didn't have to give up the game so quickly. If you must know, the bells didn't have a purpose. We just dreamed them up. Jack returned the disappointed look. Don't look so upset, the man said. The man said, you weren't separate from the rest of the universe. You're part of an ongoing wave of cause and effect. Everything you are is the result of things that have happened before. You are an animal, meaning you must walk around and find food to continue to exist. You must sleep, you must defecate and urinate, and you must learn the social structures and fit yourselves into it. If you don't do any of these things, or you do them incorrectly, the momentum of this wave will break you apart and recycle you into other things. This doesn't seem to be true anymore, Jack said. Nevertheless, the man said, waving a hand, consider movement. There is the void, which is nothing at all, and there is matter, which is everything moving around. We don't necessarily state there is nothing here, we simply say there is nothing else. If you light a fire, you know the logs above it are going to burn, not because someone decided it was like that, but because that's what fire is. We are looking at the highest level and saying, there is no ultimate end point, but things are moving nonetheless. So, did the bells come before or after us? No. Are you listening? The man stood up in his excitement. He bent close to Jack's face, his tremendous jowls vibrating and his head swelling with the passion until it filled the sky. If you push a rock over the edge of a hill, you'll know it'll continue to roll down the other side. This is all momentum, and you are a piece of it. You are movement experiencing itself. What are you going to do with this? Everything you want to do has been set into you. If something is possible and you have the desire to do it, that is your destiny. The universe is all the myriad things moving and changing and morphing and affecting each other. There is no way to escape this. When you die, you will become everything else. I don't want to do anything, Jack said, standing up, and I'm never going to die. You still don't get it. If you build a sandcastle by the ocean, are you doing it for any purpose? If you consider the nature of the human brain, what does it mean to have fun? Well, at least I didn't waste too much of my time on you. Jack walked up the hill to where William was standing, poking delicately at the plane's skeleton. It's not important, Jack said, kicking the blackened metal. It drifted apart into the wind. It was pretty, nonetheless, William said, watching the last of the plane disappear. As they walked away up the hill towards an ancient maple tree, that man shouted at their backs. Chapter 9. Jack awoke with a start. He was in the library, sitting by the window. He must have fallen asleep while he was reading. There was a book on his lap, and flurries of insects were bouncing on the window screen, attracted to the dim light of his table lamp. A cool breeze wandered in from the morning twilight and washed the film of sleep from his eyes. He had dreamed of William again. This wasn't the first time it had happened, and like the other times, the exact events seemed to drip away too quickly for him to remember. He was only left with the feeling that something was wrong. The helm must have moved while he slept. The scene outside was an endlessly rippling grassland. He could see a little glimmer of light under a tree on some far-off hilltop, and wondered if there were people out there. He couldn't tell if it was morning or evening, but it didn't really matter. The light wasn't changing, so it probably would be twilight all day. Suddenly, with a flutter of wings, something colorful brushed by his cheek and landed on the rim of the light shade. It was a tiny bird. Somehow the light was moving around it too slowly, leaving a path of bright color in its wake. A door opened quietly at the back of the library. Jack turned to see a thin, dark-haired boy standing there with a vacant expression masking his face. He was piled in what appeared to be layers of red fabric, but it didn't seem to resolve into any particular piece of clothing. It looked like a large blanket floating around him. As he walked over, long capes and cloaks swirling through the air. Saying nothing, he sat down in a chair on the other side of the window, dangling his legs solemnly. He had bare feet. Hello, Jack said, wondering if he was still dreaming. The boy tilted his head. Are you real? He asked. It wasn't necessarily a polite question, but he made it seem excessively so. I think I am, Jack said. The boy grinned. A few more birds appeared from behind him. One flew through the window and a thin blue ring rippled out like water, distorting the glass. Another landed next to the first on the lampshade, and they nuzzled each other, making rainbows where they touched. If you're real, that means I made it through, the boy said. For a while, I thought I just circled back around. Where did you make it through? Jack asked. By the maple tree. A small gust of wind came in through the window and blew the birds off the lampshade. They landed on the boy's ears, and he laughed. Who are you? He asked. Derek said there weren't other people here, but now I've met 3 unexpectedly. Oh, you know Derek? The boy asked. I haven't seen him for a long time. He shook his head lightly, and the birds lost their balance. One took refuge on a bookcase, and the other landed on Jack's knee. It walked up his leg, leaving bright footprints. He offered his finger, and it hopped onto the tip, fluttering its wings and spraying light in all directions like paint. So you're not new then? He asked, examining the bird closely. It pecked at his nose. The boy shook his head again. No, I've been here forever. I got lost, though. It was some sort of maze. Hello, people everywhere. They weren't like you. He reached over and picked up Jack's hand, running his fingers over the knuckles and bones. You are very real, he smiled kindly. What's your name? He asked. Michael. He put Jack's hand down and leaned back in his chair. The bird from the bookshelf floated down and settled on Jack's arm. It was very warm. He looked at Michael's face, something prickling his memory, and he realized that Michael looked a lot like him. At least the version of himself he had seen in the mirror that first day. They had the same thin face, dark eyes, curly black hair. They could have been brothers. Another door opened at the back of the library, and Derek drifted in, looking down at his feet and mumbling. Michael, when he saw who it was, slid out of his chair and trotted over to him, hugging him around the middle. Oh, well, but hello, where did you come from, Michael? I thought you left. Michael looked up at him. Don't be silly. You know I never leave. He started to lead Derek over to the window by the hand. Is Elliot still here? No, but we have a fox now. Michael stopped. A fox? Where is it? He let go of Derek's hand and disappeared off among the shelves. Well, it's not with me. A door clicked shut somewhere behind the bookcases. Derek stood for a long moment looking at the shelves where Michael had gone, then walked over to Jack and sat down. One of the tiny birds landed on his knee, and he smiled. So, you know him then? Jack asked. Well, I suppose he's been here for quite a long time. Yes, ever since I can remember, really. Another door opened, and they turned to see Meryl slink into the library with her arms full of books. Are you eating in here? It smells really good. She sniffed at the air. Derek looked at Jack, but he could only shrug. Maybe Michael went into the dining room when he left? That's where the fox always is. Who's Michael? Meryl asked. One of Derek's old friends, Jack told her, the corner of his mouth twitching. She narrowed her eyes. In that case, I think I'll wait until later to meet him. She dropped her books on a table with a thud and walked off among the shelves, her hips leading the way. What do you suppose she's up to? Jack asked. Oh, who knows? Derek said. Everyone's up to something these days. Chapter 10. It was mid-morning and Jack was wandering. All of the windows were open and the smell of melting snow came through the corridors on a fresh breeze. The sun was low on the horizon but very blue, like it was in spring. As he passed by a set of French doors, he could see Michael sitting out on a marble terrace, his black hair a void in the light. It looked like Wynn's balcony, but he didn't think he was anywhere near her tower. He went through the doors and Michael turned in his seat, peering at him with dark eyes. "Oh, hello," he said. "Did you come to watch the waterfall?" Jack looked out over the balcony. They were high up, perched over a deep valley surrounded by towering mountains. A thick spill of water was falling from a low point between two peaks, throwing rainbows and mist out over the gnarled pines and an echoing roar. It felt very close, maybe because the valley was so far below them, hidden in shadows. He heard some faint singing and looked back through the open doors to see Wynn poking a needle through some checkered fabric. She looked up and waved at him. "How did I even get here?" Jack asked, sitting next to Michael. "You just come through the door," Michael told him, arranging his cloak into a nest. It was draped around him in layers, glowing red in the sunlight and reflecting onto the marble. He had a small pot on his lap that he must have been working on before Jack arrived. There was a hand shovel and some black dirt by his feet. He pushed back his oversized sleeves, his arms pale in the morning sun, and started massaging a tuft of green growing in the middle with his fingers. His head turned sideways to look at it. "Wake up," he said. "It's spring today. You're going to be late." Then fronds curled out of the pot, crawled over the edges like so many hands. A moment later, a long, thin stem snaked its way into the air and squeezed out a swift bloom like a firework. It was the strangest flower Jack had ever seen. Wynn came out the door. "Hello, Jack. What a lovely day, isn't it?" She stretched wildly and pulled a flowery bandana off her head, her long gray curls swimming in the breeze. "Ah, it feels so good to loosen the evening." She shook her head, and as her hair whipped out, a flurry of moss exploded from within and drifted off in the breeze. He watched them make their way down into the dark valley below. "I asked Michael to help me with some stubborn seeds I was trying to plant." Michael handed her the pot. "What the heck is this?" she asked. "I don't know. I think it's a new one." She carried the pot back into her room, the flower bobbing its head smugly over her shoulder. Michael gave his dirty fingers a flick and the dirt burnt away into smoke. He held his clean hands up in the sunlight for a moment, examining the glow between his fingers before settling gently on his lap. Jack and Michael sat watching the waterfall for a while, and Wynn was humming pleasantly behind them, but her song slowly faded away. Jack looked back and saw that her room had disappeared. The hallway he'd come out of was packed. "Michael, do you know anything about this place?" he asked. "I guess so," he answered him. "Well, what is it exactly?" Michael thought for a moment. "Mostly fall, sometimes spring, occasionally Christmas." He stretched out his legs and put them on the curb at the base of the wall. They were just long enough for him to curl his toes over the smooth corner. "I want to stay here forever," Jack told him, watching a few hawks circling overhead. One of them gave a long cry, and it echoed quietly around the valley. "I don't think you will," Michael told him. "You have a bit more to do." Jack looked over at him. He was staring at something beyond sight. "I wonder if I'll make my way back." Michael turned, tilting his head to the side again and squinting his eyes. "Definitely. It won't be how you expect, though. You'll have to lose a part of yourself first." "That's not always a bad thing," a voice said over her shoulder. "Maybe it's one of those nasty habits that seem impossible to get rid of." Derek was standing there, paler than ever in the sunlight. His eyes were almost white, with blue-green starbursts glimmering like melted ice. "Good morning, why am I... Oh, right, Jack, I finally found something I wanted to give you." Yes. He handed Jack a small book. "What's this for?" he asked. All the pages seemed to be blank. It's a guide to anything you want to know. Very helpful. It taught me 7 different languages. I started flipping through. In spite of the book's small size, pages kept coming. They never seemed to stop. How does it work? Oh, well, it'll fill up what you need. Be careful, though. It's endless. You'll never be able to finish reading it, so don't get obsessed with anything. He laughed. Why are you giving me this? Why? He repeated. He put a finger on his bottom lip. Because you're trying to do something. You're thinking all over the place. Kind of distracting. He waved his long arms around over his head. I don't really mind, though. At least it makes you interesting. He turned around without ceremony and wandered off through the door, repeating what he said in a small voice. Do you think I'm distracting? Jack asked, turning to Michael. Michael looked at him, his face inscrutable. After a moment, he smiled widely, his eyes crinkling at the corners. No, I like your thoughts. They're very colorful. He leaned in close, watching something over Jack's head, then grabbed at the air with a quick thrust. When he leaned back, he had a bright yellow canary clasped in his fist. It was twittering in a cheerful way, its eyes closed merrily. Michael curled open his fingers slowly, and the canary hopped to its feet, shaking itself. It poofed out its feathers, then flew up onto Jack's shoulders and whispered something into his ear. Maybe you can use that book to figure out how to roll up the table. It bounced excitedly a few times, chirping loudly, before exploding in a deafening burst of feathers and lightning. Michael giggled madly. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were brainstorming. Jack couldn't hear him. His ears were ringing. All right, that is the end of the reading, and we are almost done. With the wings, we actually finished the game somewhat quickly. There's going to be I have to find all the mushrooms at the very end, but I'm not going to make you watch that. That was like nearly 4 hours of me collecting all the mushrooms, and I was angry. I was frustrated with how hard or how well the mushrooms were hidden, but so that's it. If you guys want to read the book for yourself, it is available on Amazon. I will try my best to remember to give you a link so that you can easily find it. And definitely support the writer and developer of this game, because it is a beautiful game. I enjoyed every second of it outside of the mushrooms, but that is what it is. So the next episode's going to be, I don't know how short it's going to be, but it definitely won't be an hour long, but we'll wrap the game up and go from there. So thank you so much for keeping me company, and I will be back soon with the rest of the story. 300 mushrooms. That lady must be pretty upset by now. I'm gonna go see if I can break them out without having to get all 467 mushrooms, because I have to tell you, I'm not very much of a collect-a-thon person. Collecting that many sounds horrifically boring. In here. We'll find it, buddy. Couldn't he have a spell if he was like in the general area? I would give it to me. Why do I have to stand on top of it? Anyway. It's working. I just saw. Keep trying. Break free. Wasn't expecting that. Buddy, you owe me. Fine. Have all of the Ondum magic to yourself. I'll find some other power to harness. I hope it eats you once you let it out. Did she say something about Onim? She was upset you were eating all the mushrooms. I bet that's related. I wonder what will happen if you find them all. Aw, I don't want to find them all. That's horrible. I'll keep smacking you in the muzzles if you don't leave me alone. I'll have to think about it. I'm gonna leave you guys here. We rescued him. We shooed her away. I don't know what happens if you eat all the mushrooms. That sounds torturous to find them. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe I'll have to find a good movie or something and then watch that while I find the mushrooms, because it's not something I have patience for, if I'm being honest. I actually don't have the patience for it at all. It's not the game's fault. That is a purely me flaw. That is purely a Manilia flaw of inability to focus. I mean, the wings do make it much easier, but ugh. Means I have to climb through tunnels and caves. Ugh. Oh no. This rock was worn smooth, but it's very porous. I bet there's some major volcanic activity here. 350 mushrooms, furry feet. Oh, I missed it.